Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Wilderness Fitness Podcast. I'm your host tonight, Dr. Rob Minturn. I'm always your host. I hope you guys are having a great week. Before we get started on squatting and talking about squatting, I want to go over the workout and some updates going on with Wilderness PT. To jump right into it, we are going to talk about the Spicy Saturday workout. I've got it pulled up right here. It is going to be a rounds for time. You've got a 21-15-9 pull-ups and dumbbell overhead walking lunges. For the ladies, it's going to be 35 pounds, and for the men, it's going to be 50 pounds for the RX. And for the scaled version, you can do a jumping pull-up or a foot-assisted pull-up from the bench, and then you can do a front rack carry, a 35-16 for that front rack carry. Again, you're doing a 21-15-9, and the quicker you get through it, the quicker you get done. The newsletter, so I will be typing up the newsletter tonight, and that's going to be going out tomorrow morning. In that newsletter, I'm going to be having some rebrand updates and some exciting things coming up here in February. All right, squatting. I've gotten some few questions on that about knees over toes, and there is a difference in the rehab setting versus the performance setting, so I wanted to go over that tonight. First, I want to talk about the stance and the setup. So we're going to go from bottom to top. With your feet, I see very often when people go to squat, their feet are super wide. Their feet are their toes are turned out. Not that that's bad. It's normal to have anywhere from 0 degrees toe out to about 10 degrees of toe out. So having your feet turned out isn't necessarily bad. If they look like a duck, that might be a little too much. But your stance, you should be about shoulder width apart, maybe a little bit wider than shoulder width apart. If you're going wider than that, to me, that's telling me that there's a mobility issue at your hips, and you've got to work on the mobility at your hips and maybe at your thoracic spine in order to improve your ability to squat down to parallel, all right? So the stance needs to be about shoulder width apart. Moving up to the pelvis. So with your pelvis, you need to be stacking your ribs over your hips or stacking your hips under your ribs. Yeah. Stacking your hips under your ribs. And by that I mean getting your hips into a neutral spine position. What that's going to do, it's going to force you to rely on your muscles for the stability of your spine versus relying on the spine itself for the stability. Not that that is bad. Again, a little bit of that is not going to be detrimental. But when you start to do that all the time, and when you're doing that with the heavy loads of reps of five or fewer, or you're doing those endurance loads where you're doing 15, 20, 30 reps, and you do that for every single time that you squat, you're going to run into issues with that as far as maybe some low back pain or some pitchy pain in your SI joint. So you want to stack your ribs over your pelvis or your pelvis under your ribs, however you want to think about that, and get in that neutral spine so that way your muscles are creating stability within the spine. Moving further up, you're going to look at the chest. So pretend you are Superwoman or Superman and you've got a logo on the front of your chest. When you go to squat down, you need to make sure that that chest logo is pointed at the wall straight in front of you. If you're someone that's got longer femur bones, and this is a physiological thing, if you've got longer femur bones, you're going to end up sitting your butt back a little bit further in order to get down to that parallel position. Getting down that parallel position is super important for glute engagement, for hamstring engagement, for creating more resiliency at the knee because of what it does when you get down to that parallel position, creating the forces on the ACL and the forces on the meniscus. It creates those tissues, or makes those tissues adapt, so you need to make sure that you're getting down to parallel. But you've got to make sure that the chest logo is staying up. Again, if you're someone that's got longer femurs, your chest logo might point down a little bit because you do have to hinge your butt back to the point where you can get down to that parallel position. So it just depends on the length of your femurs there. And then the bar position. This is widely variant based off of the type of squat that you're going to do. If you're doing front squats, you want that bar position while it's on the rack. You want it about halfway up your sternum, so that way you have a little leeway. If that bar starts to get heavy and you're crouching while you're racking that bar, you're not having to go up on your tiptoes to rack it. If you're doing a back squat, you want that bar around the collarbone position when you go to first get it off the rack, so that way, again, if you're squatting a little bit or if you're crouched a little bit, re-racking that weight, it's not necessarily something where you have to go up on your tiptoes to re-rack the weight. All right, progressions. So I'm going to take you all the way from a rehab setting, someone who's having knee issues or knee pain with squats. We'll take you from the rehab setting all the way up to the performance side of things. So with the progressions, we're going to usually start with the sit to stand. If someone's got issues with their knee, especially the front of the knee or the side of the knee is typically where it's at, going straight into a squat isn't bad, but if that's painful or if that's causing symptoms, we want to veer away from that for a little bit, build up some tissue resiliency, have them do something to where it's not necessarily aggravating their symptoms, add load, and then start to build up towards a squat again. So have them start with the sit to stands and then slowly work their way down to the point where they can add weight coming up from a parallel position or a 90-degree angle at the knee. And then once they've got that, then we can start to work on single leg sit to stands to improve the hip stability and the knee stability and place that demand on one leg. It's amazing to see the imbalances when you start to have people work unilaterally where you're having them work side to side. It really highlights the deficits that each leg is going to have. And sometimes they're surprised, like their stronger leg, what they thought was their stronger leg is actually the knee that wobbles in and out quite a bit. And if you've got some knee wobbling in and out, that's not the knee being weak, that is the hip being weak. And you've got to work on your glutes to provide that knee stability. And again, when that becomes easy, then we can start to add weight. We can start to lower that level in which you're standing up from and eventually getting to that parallel position. Once they are through the symptomatic or the major symptomatic portion of their rehab, then we can go to the goblet squats where you're holding the weight underneath your chin, and now you don't have that surface behind you to sit down on. You're going to perform a regular squat. There's no surface to sit down on. And then you can go to the front squats, the front bar squats, and then the back squats. Again, being mindful of your stance, especially the feet position. If your feet are too wide and you go to squat down, that's going to place an excessive amount of load on the inside of the knee just because of the position that you're going to put your knee in. So if that's an issue for you, if you feel like you're going to lose your balance because your feet are not wide enough, you've got to work on the hip mobility, likely some core strength, and then thoracic spine mobility, so that way you're able to squat back with your feet in a shoulder width apart stance. All right, and then the basis of this whole podcast tonight was the knees over toes because of the fact that I've gotten some questions on that. So in the rehab setting, it's not bad, or in general, it's not bad for your knees to go over your toes. It's totally okay for knees to go forward past the toe. In the squat position, or in the squat, with lunges, with step ups, anything like that, what you need to make sure is that the heel that your weight is through is not coming up. So in the squat, both heels should be on the ground. You should not be allowing your weight to shift forward to the point where your toes are coming up or your heels are coming up in the air. If you're doing that, you're not shifted far back enough. And again, that could be a hip mobility issue, that could be a thoracic spine mobility issue, or it could be a trunk stability issue. But in the rehab setting, we typically don't coach people to go knees over toes because of the fact that they're coming in with aggravation of their knee already. Going knees over toes really stresses that patellar tendon or the patellar ligament, however you want to think about it. It really stresses that. Not that that's bad, but they typically do not tolerate that in the rehab setting. So if they're working with me, we're going to dial it back a little bit, likely go to the sit to stands, start to load up the weight with the sit to stands, start to load up that leg with single leg movements, and then we'll start to get into the performance side of things as far as taking away that chair to sit down on and then getting into the point where they can then go to allowing that knee to go over their toe a little bit. On the performance side of things with knees over toes, there is benefit to that. It really loads up that tendon, so that way you get a little more snap out of the tendon. But again, it's not something that you need to force. If your mobility does not allow you to keep that heel on the ground as you're going into the knees over toes position with a lunge or with a squat, then you can't do that. You've got to work on the ankle mobility a little bit first, and then you can possibly lean into that knees over toes position with your squats and with your lunges. So it's all relative. It's all about creating balance on what you can tolerate and then what your mobility restrictions are going to allow for. But when you do that, it's going to highlight deficits that you have, whether it's in your hips, whether it's in your ankles, whether it's in your thoracic spine. It's going to highlight those deficits, and those are the things that you need to work on, the parts of the whole, so that way you can do the knees over toe squat or the knees over toe lunges without causing an issue. So In conclusion, squatting is for everyone. I ran into someone when I was working out in Wyoming, when I was on a contract out there, and just completely avoided squats totally because of the fact that it aggravated his back. Squatting is absolutely for everybody. It is a fundamental movement. We do it every single day of our life. You need to be able to do this with weight on your back. You need to be able to load this up without having symptoms, whether it's back pain, knee pain because you had a botched surgery or your rehab didn't go well. You need to be able to squat. So get a coach that's comfortable coaching you on how to get you to squat properly, so that way you can do the stuff, so that way you can load up the bar and eventually enhance your performance and enhance your tissue resiliency, so that way you can perform optimally in the mountains. So if you guys have any questions, no, we're good. All right, thank you guys for tuning in tonight. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. If you're in Wisconsin in the Midwest, enjoy your last day of beautiful weather on Saturday before it gets blistering cold again for the next 4 or 5 days. But if you guys have any questions on this, shoot me a message on Instagram. Otherwise, shoot me an email, and we'll catch you next week. Hey, thank you for tuning in to the Wilderness Fitness Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please head over to your podcast app and consider leaving a review. If you think a friend or a family member may benefit from listening to this podcast, please consider sharing this episode with them. We appreciate your help in the growth of this podcast. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for even more content, and the weekly Hump Day Q&A, where you can get all of your human performance, rehab, women's health, and injury prevention questions answered. If you're interested in getting hooked up with even more content from Wilderness PT from the comfort of your own home, head over to wildernessphysicaltherapy.com and get signed up for the Spike Camp membership. This is where you'll have access to prior seminars and a workout that'll have you in shape each fall, designed by yours truly. Since you're there, check out the mid-month media newsletter that goes out 1 to 2 times a month, which includes a variety of topics with the most recent research on health and human performance. You can sign up by hovering over the free resources section and subscribe to any of the free guides, or simply sign up under the mid-month media newsletter tab.